Litherist. This is Lauren Zurchin, your managing book editor here with Arwen Ellis Dayton. I am so excited to have her here. We have interviewed her before. We featured her on the site. She is the amazing author of Seeker and now Traveler, which just came out in January. And we featured it last month on the site. And so we are going to have a really awesome in-depth interview with Arwen today about this book. So hi, Arwen. Thanks for joining us.
Hi. Thanks for having me again.
Okay. So from your point of view, how would you summarize Traveler for people if they're not sure what it's about, if they're just kind of checking this out? Now, granted, I will say this though before you continue, we will be doing spoilers. Like we're going to talk very openly about this book. So if you haven't read it, you may want to read it and then come back. But I'm just curious, like how you tell people about the story.
Okay, well, in Seeker, it's like there were 3 teenagers and they'd spent most of their lives training for what they thought was a noble purpose, to be seekers, only to discover that their family was actually using them as assassins. And in Traveler, as they try to kind of escape from this fate, they realize that the world of seekers is so much larger than they knew. And kind of immediately get swept up in this plan that was begun a really long time ago that threatens their survival. So you definitely, it needs the first book, but it sort of continues right from there.
Well, and I noticed too that how I wrote it here is there was a big shift from like the first book intro, info dumping, storyline laying to like questing. It became like this was like a quest book to me. It's kind of how I saw it. And it was interesting because you set it up too for book 3 to kind of like, it's like the story's kind of continuing on that way. So I mean, I'm assuming when you set this up, were you intending it to feel as questy as it did?
Yeah, I felt like I was moving the pieces into place in Seeker. And by the second half of Seeker, the first book, things are starting to move faster because everything is kind of in place. And I always saw that this story would then kind of take off. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if quest is exactly how I would describe it, but it's not inaccurate. So, I like to kind of, it's like once you have all those pieces there, you can kind of just go. And that was really fun as a writer.
I guess I was just seeing it as, when I think of questing, I think of like A to B, like they were going to the caves, they were looking up these different like locations, and so it was kind of, I mean, they were like seeking the knowledge of what they were learning. That's kind of how I saw it.
Yeah. And because they stumble into this much larger plot that they had no idea was there, it kind of makes that quest, if you want to call it that, a lot more urgent. But I like that. I like urgent things.
Yeah, it was really interesting because the way you paced it was different from the first book, but I really liked it because you jumped into John's mom's point of view, which was really cool. And into Catherine is her name, is what you call her. And so tell us about that, about why you decided to bring her whole story in. I actually loved that storyline. I thought it was fantastic.
I always knew that Catherine was going to be in the books. I just, I couldn't get to her in book 1, although she is in book 1, but she's really one of the anti-heroes in book 1. But I always knew that was only a very small part of her story. And one thing that I really enjoy as an author is setting up a character in one way and then you learn enough about them that you completely change your viewpoint, because I feel like everybody is that in some way. And even people you absolutely hate, if you were to look at them from the right point of view in your life, you would have a completely different outlook on them. So I always knew that about Catherine. She's actually one of my favorite characters in this world. So I really couldn't wait in this book to add this other dimension of the main character's parents when they are the same age as the main characters currently are. And I think it definitely shines a new light on the main characters' lives as well.
Yeah, I loved how, kind of touching on what you were saying, and it's funny what you were saying, I actually have that written right here because just the idea of like the switching and who's good, who's bad, and like, you know, like you're saying, turning characters around on their head. But I love how as you progressed her story, you know, we kind of see the woman she was, and then, you know, you connect to who we have known her to become, which it felt like a very different woman. I mean, obviously that when that situation happened, that turning point in her life, it changed her outlook, her manner, everything about her seemed to just change and almost harden. That's kind of how I saw it. But yeah, so good and evil blurring, right and wrong blurring. Like you did an amazing swap of this, and I'm really curious how you laid that out, because, you know, were you basically figuring out the core of each character and then their fatal flaw? Sorry, we have a cat coming to visit me here. She's very needy. Sorry.
Very cute.
Yeah. So like, how were you figuring that out? Or was it, I'm just really curious because it's so awesome in this book. Like every character is literally like on their heads by the end. It's crazy.
I honestly just don't think of characters that the way you said, like when you figure out their core personality and then their fatal flaw, like I just don't think of people that way. I feel like we have all done things that we regret or wish we could go back and change or have another chance at. And if somebody just saw you in that moment, they would think you were a total jerk, you know? So I guess I feel like I see characters through a spectrum all the time. And it's most interesting to me to see when they're moving from one part of that spectrum to another.
I really thought that was cool to like, I like the word spectrum because I was saying it in my mind as like a core shift. But I mean, it's like you're saying, it's only a glimpse of a person when you meet them sometimes, if you think of them as good or bad. And it's really this whole, you know, encompassing part. But it was really interesting to me that how you played with the reader's emotions with that. I mean, I found it, I don't know, it's kind of screwed with my head because like by the second half of the book, yeah, I mean, because I had, again, not that they're different, but they are different. Like but stuff in the second half, I was just kind of like, I don't know how I feel about these people anymore. Like I was totally for this person and now I'm not sure. And now this person, I'm not sure either. And I think that was incredibly powerful in the book. And
I like you calling it a core shift. I actually think that's a cool way to look at it because it is a spectrum, but wait, I'm getting like a crazy echo. Okay. But sometimes the core does shift and really change. You know, it's like you're moving a little bit and then something happens and you move a lot. And I don't know, those are the cool moments to explore. So I'm happy that you picked that out as something that affected you.
Well, and it's interesting because, I mean, I would say that you touched on a core shift with Shinobu in book one with his addiction. But again, you know, maybe he had that addictive quality when he was on, you know, in Scotland, but we just didn't see that as much. But I just found it interesting, like that transferred over to the helm addiction. And then, but I just loved how like, you know, come on, sorry, she's very loving. And so she's like, I want you to love me right now. I don't care what you're doing. But no, I found that really interesting how you, like in John too, like you start off the series with they're a couple and then he's sort of the bad guy, but he's not, but he thinks he's doing well, which is how all evil people start off. You think you're doing the right thing. But then in this book, you pushed us back towards him being the good guy again, is how I saw it. Like, I don't know. I feel like these were incredibly complex, developed characters that felt very believable because of that. But I'm a little nervous now for book 3 because we were saying core shift. I'm really curious to see once the dust settles down where we get to. Was there one of them that you were more connected to character-wise as you were writing these?
I feel like whichever one I'm writing at the time is the one I'm most connected to. But Shinobu is always the one I want to love the most. So when he fails to live up to that, it's really sort of upsetting. But I can't. It doesn't make me stop liking him. So
that's exactly it. It's like That's exactly, like he's like the best, but then you're like, you're an idiot. What are you doing? You know,
You're an idiot.
you're
Yeah.
an idiot. Like, but at the same time, it's like, you know, addiction is hard. And, you know, once he got in that, on that route, and, you know, again, if I was, if I was basically forced to murder children, I would probably be drugged up too, honestly, you know, like.
I'm with you. Totally. It's not, honestly, there's very little they do that you couldn't somehow justify by the things that are going on around them. But it's kind of, for me, the choice of, well, when are they going to actually decide what they think is the right thing? And will that ever happen? And if it does, then they'll be different than they were at the beginning.
Do you want to maybe kind of take that into the final scene of the book? So the final scene, basically, they're in the in-between area, and, you know, you leave us hanging, which obviously is going to lead into book 3. But I mean, I feel this internal struggle. I know it was the helm, but like, I don't know. I feel it was really interesting to see that logic coming back up with him.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, first of all, even if it was not 100% his own doing, it's still pretty bad. So he's going to, at some point,
I'm telling you, she's circled my desk and then she jumps back.
Also, I feel like cats have this innate sense of where your attention is. And if your attention is on something really strongly, it's like a huge magnet. And they're just like, I'm going to sit in that attention.
She's extremely affectionate. But yeah, like I'm at my desk where I edit my photos, and she will sit on my hand while I'm trying to edit. And I'm like, seriously? Okay. Anyways, I'm sorry. Continue. Cat distraction here.
I love pets. So just, it's even if he has an excuse for his Shinobu, even if he has an excuse for his behavior, it's still pretty bad. So how he's going to come to at some point and go like, what did I do? And Quinn hopefully is going to come to as well. And what's she going to think about that? So,
oh my gosh.
Or will she understand? Because she's been remarkably understanding.
Yes, but at the same time, this just hit me. It kind of almost echoes in a way what John is doing. Like, he's doing something bad because he thinks it's for the good of everybody. And she really was not okay with that. You know what I mean? So
yeah, I mean, I think it's also, even if you understand and you're not angry even, is that a person that you want in your life? You know, they're going to have to grapple with that question. But I just kind of like, I feel like they go through things in some ways that are completely normal teenager type stuff in terms of the emotions involved. But then it's like I've amped the stakes up far beyond anything any of us could really tolerate. And it's kind of interesting to see what happens. It's almost like I'm torturing them willfully to see what they're going to do. It seems evil, but I also think it's fun to read.
No, it's wonderful to read. And it's interesting too, because the romance really isn't, I mean, it's there, but it's kind of like oh yeah, and by the way, this is happening. It's not like the core of the story, which was very refreshing. It was really nice. And like when they finally, you know, when things.
Oh no, wait, I can't hear you. Are you still there? No. Lauren? Hello? Lauren, are you there?
Are we back?
Was that on my side?
No, that was on my side. I can clip it. I just actually sent you an email.
Oh, okay. Your
The
cat.
universe.
Your cat
No,
unplugged it.
yeah, literally just died, and I was like, "What? What happened?" So I actually synced it up to my phone. I do my phone as a hotspot. So unless like the cell towers fall, oh my god. Anyways, all right. Let's just go back to that question, and then I can clip it. I'm so sorry.
It's totally fine.
Oh god. Okay. All right. So I was asking about before that, disruption.
Romance.
We were talking about the romance. Yeah. Is there anything you wanted to add to that? Because I was just kind of saying how it's there and it's important, but it's not the key of the books.
Well, definitely these books are not romances, but I think that it ends up just being an additional dimension that hopefully is, something we look forward to a little bit or are worried about a little bit, but isn't the whole point.
Yeah, I agree. And it's, but it's still nice, especially because of the way that they've all kind of been in love with each other in different ways growing up. And it's not just like, I met this boy and he's my man forever and I know him one day. It's like, yeah, no, they've, like the history helps it feel more believable. So yeah, that was great. So I wanted to talk about the magic system. So how you kind of expanded upon the fun things that you laid the groundwork for in book one. You add some really cool things in this book. So I just wanted to talk about the creation of that and like how you kind of expanded the world there.
Well, funnily enough, I never think of it as magic. For me, I think as we get to book three, we'll have a little bit of a broader explanation of where all these things came from and how they were created. But again, they feel in some ways like magic. So I always imagine this fairly enormous tapestry of these families going back for hundreds and hundreds of years. And these implements, if you want to call them that, being passed down from generation to generation. And so I had a ton of these things in my mind, and it was really interesting to pick exactly where and when I would bring them into the story, and then how they would sort of help in the uncovering. It's almost like these kids are at the tip of an iceberg and they haven't been told anything about what's underneath the water. And as they go down and discover, you get to see which pieces you send up to the surface, for them to find out. So that was really cool. And the idea of this helmet, which they call also a focal, that can actually help you focus your thoughts if used correctly, I thought was just cool. I mean, who wouldn't want to have that if they knew how to use it right? But then what would the downside of that be? So that's been sort of kicking around in my head for a long time. You have, just as with a person, when you have the way they could go bad or the way they could go good, all of their implements kind of have the yin and yang of how they can be used. And that's kind of fun to explore.
Well, and I really liked how the helm kind of picks up the wearer, which is what the kind of the core issue is with Shinobu, because you're basically getting the middle dread in his head, giving him bad advice, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, so it's like it feels evil, but it's, in and of itself, it's not an evil thing. It's just because of what had happened with the past. So it was interesting that you have this tool that you could kind of manipulate as you wanted for storytelling and kind of have it be, again, like core things shifting and, purposes being different than what you expect. So that was really neat. I also really liked the simple things like the disruptor shield, like how that even was able to send the sparks back to them, and just, I don't know. I thought it was really cool to see if they're not magical, the elements that we're dealing with kind of on a bigger scale, I guess.
Well, it's funny because they're going to need every single tool and a few more for book three. So I just have tried to bring them in sort of one at a time until we have the larger array that's actually going to be necessary for what happens in book three. So there's more to come on that tack right there.
That's cool. That's actually really exciting to see, because I'm going to be like, curious to see how where you kind of put that into different elements here. Okay, so you kind of touched on this with your blog tour with us. If you guys haven't seen that, she did this awesome video for us about the locations in the Seeker series. And this book, you go to some really cool new places. You go to like ice caves in Norway, and you're on the skeleton coast in Namibia. Why those places? Did you just want to go there and you just thought they were amazing? Or, I mean, they are amazing.
I've never been to those two places, first of all, but I plan at some point to go. But, you know, I've been fascinated with ice caves because they're so otherworldly and there's just nothing like them anywhere. And I thought that these families, because they have this implement, the athame, that can allow them to get from one place in the world, you know, to another place essentially immediately, that they would pick the coolest places to have their kind of family meeting place, or their central place, which ends up playing a part in the book, in book 2, where they locate these sort of forgotten meeting points that is actually part of the mystery that they're trying to find their way through. But ice, I mean, who wouldn't want that to be an ice cave? Like, if you didn't have to trek there, like, of course, if you had to trek like 6 days with a backpack and, you know, ice cleats or whatever, yeah, no. But if you could go there immediately, of course, that's where I want to go.
I'm laughing really hard right now because I'm actually going to Alaska this summer to do photographs in ice caves. I'm not even lying to you right now. I saw the pictures and I was like, I don't know what this is, but I need to go there right now. And I was like, everything's teal and they're in the, I get it. So it's really cool. Apparently I'm going to be like texting you pictures from the ice cave. And be like, oh my God.
That video inspired you. That's so awesome. But just know that that's a cave inside a glacier versus a cave that is just always at the temperature of ice, but is actually made out of rock. So in my book, it's kind of a combo of those two.
Yeah, but it's still very cool. And I love the skeleton coast too. You're right. I mean, it kind of makes sense that each family would have a really cool place, but that they're all kind of different too. It kind of, you know, adds to the personality of the families too, I would say.
Exactly.
That's kind of how I see it. But yeah, I was reading that and I was like, oh my gosh, if you have been to these places, that's
not yet, soon.
So are there any kind of things you want to talk to us about with book 3 coming up? I mean, you're still working on it right now, but I'm just curious, like you were saying, Seeker set up the pieces. I feel like you're setting up for checkmate going on in this book. There's a lot of like, it felt very like all these tentacles kind of coming together for me as a reader, because you had all these different plots, but they all kind of converged by the end of the book.
Right. In book 3, you know, it's funny because when you create a world like this, in theory, it could go on indefinitely and you could explore these other little tangential things that happen in a different generation or an upcoming generation. But really what I always wanted to do with these 3 books is tell the story of those 4 main characters into, I don't want to say 100% satisfying conclusion, but a satisfying / entertaining / slightly frustrating conclusion, because I feel like those are the best books when you're still like, yes, yeah, but wait, okay, you know, there's still like pieces that could spin off and mean something else. But I really want to essentially tell the story of those 4 in a way that leaves them in a place where we're like, okay, it is not what, maybe it's not what I expected, maybe it's not even what I wanted, but I understand how they got there, and hopefully it was an exciting journey to end up there.
Yeah, that's extremely cool. I'm just sitting here thinking though that I'm like wondering if this is going to come back to bite you in the butt when you're like touring for the next book. People are going to be like, why did you, whatever, and you're going to have to answer that same. You're just like business cards with like, this is why I did that.
You know, you just have to write what you think would be fun to, you know, what you want to see happen, even if it's, somebody once told me a good book, or maybe it was even a good movie, it strikes the balance between satisfying and defying the audience's expectations. And if you because if you satisfy every expectation exactly, it's just like, okay, yeah, I knew that was going to happen. But if you defy every expectation, sometimes in Game of Thrones, I feel that way, where I'm like, but you had to give me at least this, or like, why couldn't you just give me this? You know, you need a few of those, you know, breadcrumbs, your carrots, I should say. So I'm hoping, I just like the idea of striking a balance between satisfying and defying expectations. Will I pull it off? I don't know.
I hope so. It sounds like, I mean, you're like, I'm trying, I don't know. Yeah, I actually think Maud's character development in this book was so interesting. Like, she's really cool and weird. Like, one of the most interesting characters I've read in a really long time, just because she's relatable, but she's not, and she's crazy and like and powerful, but then she's still this younger woman. Like, she's really neat. I mean, and you actually you had a little short about her that came out at the end of last year too. Yeah, talk to us about Maud a little bit, because she's kind of the non-traditional character in the main quartet. It's
really funny to write Maud, because I have to get in that frame of mind, because she's almost like terrifying, you know, when we first meet her, but then we love her, hopefully. You know, I have more people walk up to me and say, you're never going to believe this, but, and I always know, like, they're going to tell me Maud is their secret favorite character. Like, that's always what happens when they're like, you're going to be surprised to hear me say this. And I'm like, Maud. But I feel like she has been so altered by her experience over these centuries. And now that experience is kind of peeling away in certain ways, because she's been forced to stay in the world with the rest of them much longer than normal. So watching that kind of semi-transformation, which continues into the third book, has been really interesting, because she's still not like the other characters, but she's perhaps a little bit more like them. So what does that feel like? And that's been really interesting to get into her head with that.
Well, and I found that interesting too. That was kind of the switch with John, where he kind of shifted back more on the side of the good guy, was his relationship with her and how they're developing as partners and, you know, working together, even though she's training him. Their dynamic is really interesting, because again, you can see the core of John still being a good person and wanting good things, and her essence as well is kind of connecting with him on a younger level. It was really interesting to read, because it was not what I typically would expect in like a young adult book. Yeah.
Maud is funny because she is, first of all, she is so able, you know, like she's so good at things you can't argue with, like fighting, that even somebody like John can learn humility just being in her presence, because she's also not using those things in any way to make less of somebody else. She's actually trying to pull that out of him. So I feel like her influence, while sort of frightening and uncomfortable, even awkward feeling sometimes, it's pulling all these good things out of him just by knowing her.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, you know, I think it's really neat to see her perspective on specifically what you just said, like how she's seeing him grow as a character in her own weird little mind, you know, like that's really interesting you're laughing because it's like, it is a weird little, it's like a weird
giant mind, hers. Like she feels so spacious to me inside this tiny little body, you know?
Yeah, it's very cool. And I love the, you know, the limits that you've pushed the body to, where she can throw her hearing and she can throw her sight and she can do these really cool things that she's teaching John how to do too. It was really cool to read. So I'm really interested to see how they kind of all come together in book 3. What was I haven't actually had the chance to read the little novelette.
The novella. Novelette. It was pretty short. So that was really a look at Maud when she was a little bit younger. And it takes place, I'm trying to remember exactly when, but it was a while ago, like 100 years ago or something.
So she was full-blown dread. It was like previous.
Yeah, she was younger, and it was sort of, it's a little bit of an interesting, almost medieval feeling story featuring her and a little bit of the Seeker history. So
oh, very cool. So nice little filler to add to the world. So,
yeah.
Awesome. Is there anything you want to tease us about with book 3? Anything we can kind of expect besides the main 4 kicking ass and taking names, basically?
All I would say is that there were some new characters introduced in Traveler in book 2, and there will be a few more introduced in book 3. They're not necessarily point of view characters, but they are going to be extremely influential in how all, as you said, all these tentacles and lines of story finally kind of intersect.
Okay, very, very cool. Do you have any book recommendations for people? Have you read anything recently?
I'm right in the middle of reading The Library at Mount Char, which is this weird fantasy set now that is kind of fascinating. So I think I recommend that pretty highly. I'm at the point where I'm like not quite at the end, and it's frustrating, but I think it's going to be frustrating in a really good way. So there are many sublime moments in this book, The Library at Mount Char.
That's a really interesting description.
It's not always like, it's maybe not all sublime, but there's so many sublime moments that I'm like, wow, this is pretty amazing.
It's like a balance between sublime and frustration. That's basically what you just said.
A little bit, but it's not bad. That's in a good way.
Cool. We'll have to check it out. Yeah, I mean, because we love fantasy here at Lithris. So cool. Arwen, is there anything else you want to touch on before we go?
That was great. I love talking. You guys are such a great site. Thank you for continuing to have me on.
It's fun. We were talking before this started, everyone. We were like, we're talking about Comic-Con and just hanging out. It's really nice to continue to have these relationships as series come out with the authors and connect with them on that kind of a deeper level. So yeah, it's really cool. Okay, so Lithris, be sure to enter giveaways. We're going to have a giveaway. Random House is going to be doing a giveaway of the set of the first 2 books. I also have a copy of the hardback. I have an ARC here that I'm going to keep as my copy, and then I am going to give away my physical hard copy of book 2 as well. So you can be sure to look out for those giveaways because they're going to be posted right around this video. So okay, Arwen, I just wanted to say thanks. Thanks for having for coming here and joining us.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
Okay, and all right, bye, Lithris.
Bye.